Hello, this is Krishnamurthy, your CISSP coach. In this video, I will cover about GDPR, the important points you need to understand and remember about GDPR, why it is important, the penalty, and if there is a data breach, how you should handle it. Now let's go to the scope. If personal data of EU citizens or EU residents is processed, okay, or goods or services are offered to EU citizen or residents, then GDPR directly applies to your organization, even if you are not running the business in EU. Okay, so if your organization is collecting or processing data of EU citizen or EU resident, then you have to comply for GDPR, even if your organization is not physically running in EU. Okay, so all companies all over the world are affected as long as they process the personal data of EU citizens. So that is the scope. Now let's start with the penalty. So to see how big is the impact when GDPR is not followed. Okay, so there are two types of GDPR fine. Either it is 10 million or 2%, 20 million or 4% of your organization's worldwide annual revenue, whichever is higher. And it is also based on whether your organization has taken all the control measures to protect the data. These 10 criteria are applied to find out the fine amount. You have to remember 10 million or 2%, 20 million or 4%. This is what you should remember. Let's see who are all the participants in this GDPR. I will start with the data subject. Okay, so data subject is your customer from whom you are collecting data. So data subject is the person from whom you are collecting the data. Next, data controller. Data controller is the one who handles the data or he is owner of the organization. This is a very important role because the data controller decides how and why the data is processed. While the data controller deciding on how and why of the data processor may be a third party that process data on behalf of your organization. Okay, so we have seen data subject from whom you collect data, controller decides how and why, data processor is a third party that is doing the process, number crunching job. Let's see other two, personal data and data processing. Personal data we have seen in OECD. Any information that can uniquely identify a person, that is personal data. It can be email, name, phone number. This is not the complete list, but just to give you an idea of what is personal data. Data processing. Any action performed on data comes here. You will fall under GDPR. Okay, so these are the key definitions. In the previous video on OECD, we have seen 8 principles. So if you have understood them clearly, you can see GDPR is almost like that, maybe an extension of OECD. Now, what are the data protection principles of GDPR? When you collect data, when you handle it, okay, so these should be the means: lawful, fair, and transparent. Lawful, fair, and transparent. This is how the data processing should be done. Purpose limitations. This we saw in OECD as well, right? Don't misuse the data that is collected. Use only for the purpose explicitly specified to the data subject. Data minimization is collecting only the data which is absolutely necessary for the purpose. Accuracy, yeah, we have to maintain the data accurately. Like if the PII of the person has changed, that should be updated in your databases as well. Storage limitation is how long you can store the data. While collecting, if you have told to the subject that you will be storing the data only for 6 months, you can store the data only for 6 months. Storage limitation. confidentiality and integrity. So while collecting, storing and processing, you have to ensure utmost standards is followed. Accountability. This we saw as the eighth point in OECD as well. It is the same point here. So here the data controller takes the ultimate accountability to follow all these data protection principles. Let's drill down on this accountability part. Now we understand data controller has the ultimate accountability to be GDPR compliant. So how it is done in an organization? So you have to understand these 5 points. First, you need a dedicated team and they have to maintain a separate log of what is the data collected, how it is used, where it is stored, when it is used. It is not just storing data, so even when it is used, a log should be maintained. Now, for doing all this, of course, you have to train your staff, and wherever applicable, wherever necessary, you need to have a separate data protection officer. And if you are using any third party for processing the data, the same level of seriousness they also should be having. So you should have those things mentioned in your data processing agreements. A little bit about data security now. We all understand, we all agree data should be handled securely by your organization. Now, for doing this, whatever technical security controls like MFA, end to end encryption should be implemented. The important point with respect to data security in GDPR is any data breach should be reported within 72 hours. Okay, remember this number. Any data breach should be reported within 72 hours to a supervisory authority. In the previous section, we saw a role about data protection officer. Any data breach with respect to GDPR will be reported by this data protection officer. By design and by default. Now, with respect to GDPR, security is by design and by default. It cannot be done as an afterthought. I will end this session with people's privacy rights. It goes like this: the right to be informed about what data is collected. Your subject should have access to the data that you are collecting. If there is an issue, something has changed, there is a right of rectification. Right to erasure is if the subject thinks that your organization should not be holding their data, you should delete the data if it is requested by the subject. At what level of processing that can be restricted? The data that you are holding, the data should be able to portable, and right to object. The eighth point is very interesting, right? So rights in relation to automated decision making and profiling. These are the points I wanted to cover with respect to GDPR in this video. I hope this will be useful for your CISSP preparation. This is Krishnamurthy, your CISSP coach. Thank you.